Yo, Shortbox Nation, this is Bart, and I'm here to tell you right now that con season starts early this year with the return of Northeast Florida's premier anime, comic book, and sci-fi event, Collective Con. That's right, Northeast Florida's largest pop culture convention returns for its 10th year on March 8th through the 10th at the Prime Osborne Center in Jacksonville, Florida. 10 years of Collective Con, they're pulling all the stops out to make sure this is a can't-miss event. And the guest list they got going, don't even get me started on the guest list. I mean, they've got A-list celebrity guests and voice actors from some of your favorite movies, anime, and video games like Elijah Wood and Sean Ashton, Ray Park, Trisha Helfer, Ross Marquand, Max Middleman, and Bo-Katan herself will be there, Katie Sackhoff. Tell me what other convention is giving you the opportunity to meet Frodo and Sam from Lord of the Rings, Darth Maul, and One Punch Man all under the same roof. Only at Collective Con. And if you're looking to get some of your favorite comics signed, or if you want to get an original sketch from some of the best comic artists in the world, well, you're in luck, because there'll be plenty of comic and creator guests there, like DC comic artist extraordinaire Clay Mann, Harvey Award-nominated illustrator John Taylor Christopher, Marvel and DC cover artist Chris Stevens, and acclaimed Star Wars author Timothy Zahn. They'll all be at Collective Con this year. And if you're looking to bring the family, or if you want to make a weekend out of it, you're in luck, because there'll be so much going on at Collective Con that weekend in the form of vendors, fan panels, video game tournaments, cosplay contests, after parties, and a bunch of fan events. You can purchase single and 3-day weekend passes now using the link in this episode's show notes, or by going to collectivecon.com to book your tickets and hotel. Buy your tickets now, and I'll see you at Collective Con, March 8th through the 10th. Now let's start the show.
Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the Shortbox Podcast.
Season 9.
What's up, dude?
Yo, check this shit out.
About to drop that comic book talk show that brings you the best.
The
Shortbox Podcast is recorded live from Jacksonville, Florida.
Yo! Dude, I completely forgot what the fuck. Oh my god, here we go.
Let's go.
Yo! Shortbox Nation, welcome back to the podcast. Thanks for joining us. Or I guess joining me. I keep saying us. You know what? No, it's a family affair. It's us. It's us.
You're joining us right now.
Oh, wow. You're jumping in on the intro.
Yeah, you're joining us right now.
Wow.
Come on.
I actually had this all planned out, and you're just jumping in.
I mean, I like to assert myself to the situations I'm.
Just the bravado that you've got going on. Pretend like you're a brand new guest that's never been on the show. Let me do this really quick.
Okay, yeah, do your thing.
If this is your first time tuning in, welcome to the show. My name is Bart, and this is the Shortbox Podcast, the comic book talk show that brings you the best conversations about comic books and pop culture inspired by comics. This is episode 412, and today we're talking with someone that needs no introduction because he's managed to weasel his way onto the podcast at least 5 times since making his first appearance on the podcast 4 years ago, back in episode 259. Some of you already know who I'm talking about. You hear that number, you're like, oh, I know that episode. For some reason, I keep letting him back on the podcast. But today's a little different because he comes back to us as a published author. I'm talking about Warren Evans, a.k.a. the Bart of Darkness on Instagram, if you follow him. He's also the host of the Simpsons is Greater Than podcast. And alongside his collaborators and co-writers, James and Lydia Hicks of the Simpsons Theory YouTube channel, Warren has a new book out. It's called Collecting the Simpsons, The Merchandise and Legacy of Our Favorite Nuclear Family. It's a book that explores the explosion of Simpsons merchandise and products started in the 90s all the way up to modern times. It's a really nice coffee table book. It features hundreds of pages of Simpsons action figures, video games, comics, lunchboxes, and yes, even cookie jars. We're also going to be flipping through the book. We're going to be looking at some of the pages. I went ahead and bookmarked a couple of chapters and pages I want to talk about. So all in all, we're going to be showing off the book today. So if you're a cheap bastard like me that needs a very thorough preview before you go ahead and invest some money, then this episode is for you. And I don't blame you at all. I've already purchased my copy. You can watch the video version of this podcast on YouTube. There's also a link to the video version in this episode's show notes. And a little fun fact, we'll also be doing a giveaway for one of these books. And we'll announce the details on that contest later on this episode. So you got to stay tuned. And before we bring on Warren, I'm going to have him sit in silence, awkward silence for a little longer. But before I bring on Warren, I want to give a big shout out to our sponsor, Gotham City Limit. It's Jacksonville's premier shop for comics, toys, and collectibles. And if you live in Jax, might I suggest that you go, not only should you buy a copy of the book from Gotham if you live in Jax, but I highly advise stopping by the shop at some point this month because they're doing another massive holiday sale. They're doing 24 days of deals is the name of the sale they got going on. So every day of the month of December is a different deal. I think Ben is sharing all the details every single day on his social media. So if you aren't following Gotham City Limit on Instagram or Facebook, you probably should because I know Ben is practically going to be giving away stuff. Now, for those of you that don't live in Jax, no worries. The good news is that you can still partake and enjoy some of these steals and deals by shopping Gotham's online store at GothamCityLimit.com. We'll also have Ben on later this episode to share some comic book recommendations. So if you're looking for a fresh new starting point, if you're looking for some new titles to read, or you're looking to add some things to your Christmas list and shopping list, we got you covered this episode. We're bringing back the Fistful of Comics segment for this one. So we got plenty to talk about this episode. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself because we haven't even brought on the man of the hour. He's been sitting here in awkward silence, just waiting to say something. So without further ado, Shortbox Nation, let's welcome back for the fifth, sixth, I think even seventh time now, a Shortbox reigning champion, a good friend of the show, recurring guest, honorary co-host at this point. Let's give a loud round of applause for Warren Evans.
Wow. Wow, man.
They love you, man.
Oh, my God. Stop. Oh, come on. Hey. Wow. Am I good to talk now, Botter?
I mean, I just welcomed you on the
Okay. I'm just making sure. I mean,
make yourself at home because, you've done it for the last 5-6 times.
Seriously, as hard as it was to sit here and say nothing during that intro, I'm flattered by all the nice things that you said. I'm flattered that not only that you are having me on to talk about the book, but that you enjoyed the book, man. And thanks for just, thanks for sharing the love. I mean, I know I forced you to do it, but thanks anyway.
Would you have continued to be my friend had I not had you on the podcast to promote the book? Would you have felt the way? I felt like you would.
I think we would have still said what's up to each other, like, in the coffee shop, but I don't know if we would have, it would have been a very like, oh, hey man, how you been? All right, see you later kind of thing. Whereas, since we're doing the episode, since you're holding up the contract, I think we're going to be closer for a lot longer.
Wow, that means a lot. Warren, speaking about coffee real quick, do you mind if I take a sip of of today's drink?
Butter, please. And what you're drinking, for anyone listening, is a Kiaguthu Peaberry from Kenya, and that is by Brandywine Coffee Roasters, who actually sponsor my podcast. So I guess by proxy, they sort of sponsor me, so they sort of sponsor this. So yeah,
this episode is brought to you by a lot of things today. Collecting the Simpsons, a hardcover book, and Brandywine coffee.
It's true, but all joking aside, like, this is really good coffee. We made some before the episode. And if you like coffee and you're interested in that sort of thing, go to my Instagram. If you don't already follow me, go to my bio and type in Darkness on their website. Get 10% off. Get you some coffee for a deal. We all love deals this time of year. It's the time of deals, season of deals.
And one thing I love more than anything is a good shameless plug.
Not to hijack anything, because we're going to talk about all kinds of things today, but this is a sort of a reunion of sorts, if you think about it, because,
hi, boys.
We joke about me being on, 5, 6 times. I don't know how many times, honestly. Maybe it is more than, maybe it's 5, maybe it's more than 5.
I've got them all down here. Okay. I've got it all listed.
Okay. So there you go. However many times, but Botter also has been on my show. We had like a sort of like sub show that we did for a little while. And so this is a Pod Boys reunion. So like real heads, people that have listened to Simpsons is Greater Than, and Shortbox for a while. This is like, this is sort of like some special content for them, possibly. And I think we need to acknowledge that.
Yo, welcome back, man.
Dude, it's great to be back.
Thank you so much for sitting for 2 hours as I, fucked around with all this technical difficulty.
I wouldn't change anything about you, Botter. I love your dedication to making this podcast sound good. It's honestly, it's a nice thing to see.
All right, before we get to talking about the book, because we have the book front and center. Yes. Amazing book so far. We're going to really get into it. We're going to flip through some pages and all the bookmarks I've got. But I've got to ask, how is the podcast doing? How is Simpsons Greater Than doing?
It's been a really interesting year for the podcast because, I think when you start a podcast like I did as a response to, the pandemic and spending a lot more time at home, and you're like, I need a way to kill some time. So I'm going to start this podcast, and I'm going to use it as an excuse to like further what I do, to meet more people from the show. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. Eventually, as life got a little more normal, time got a little thinner, projects got a little more, and the book is a big reason for that, why the show slowed down a little bit. But what ended up happening is, while this is the least amount of stuff I've put out for the podcast in a year, the response and the amount of people that have found it this year has been like, the biggest growth the show has had. And it's sort of reinvigorated my interest in the podcast. And people who listen, they know that now I have a co-host, my friend Brandon.
Big shout out to Brandon.
Viral sensation Brandon. He created the little Simpsons TV that you've DM'd all your friends a million times. And he's the co-host now. So the show is like moving in an interesting direction, but it's doing well.
Good stuff. You guys, just hit, what number are you guys on?
We are almost to, I think we're to episode 80.
Oh, wow.
Something like that. Yeah. So time's moving
Big one,
quick.
hundo. It's definitely coming in 2024.
It's coming. It's coming soon.
Can I also say for our video watchers, this was not planned at our wardrobe today, right? Like, I came through with the Simpsons shirt, which, by the way, Bart of Darkness original.
It is true. It is true.
And you came through with this epic Wolverine Weapon of X shirt, but it actually belongs to a band.
Yeah. So any music nerds, especially people that like heavier music, I'm looking at you, Shaggy Black. Entombed was a band, and they made music for years and years, but in the 90s, they had a record called Wolverine Blues that had nothing to do with Wolverine, but people, including their label, really pushed them to do this like co-branding with Wolverine. And I guess they got it cleared by Marvel. I don't really know how all that worked, but they had like imagery that included Wolverine. They had Wolverine clips in like a music video. They did all this stuff. So it kind of became synonymous with that record and with that band. And that was sort of a big thing in the 90s with a lot of bands, which is like a whole other episode we could do. But Entombed like has this like connection to Wolverine because of that record and that song. And so, for the rest of time, you'll see like merchandise for Entombed with Wolverine on it. It's one of those things.
We're covering a lot of ground today. We got coffee talk out the way, heavy metal talk out the way. Is it heavy metal? Am I saying?
Yeah, no, it definitely is. It's heavier metal. But that's the thing that's so interesting about, and that's why I make the joke about Pod Boys, because this is an episode, about the book and it's about the project that I did. But it's also like when we get together sometimes, which we don't get to do as often anymore, it's kind of just an excuse to just kind of, talk about what's going on. And I think that's what's fun about coming on here is sometimes they're very specific. Sometimes we're just hanging out. And I think you're going to learn something along the way.
That is well said. Well said. So I guess I should let any new listeners know, if they're expecting a very in-depth interview with Warren and his origin and all that stuff, you're not getting it, all right? Clearly, this dude has been on here way too many times. But if you aren't following Warren on Instagram at Bart of Darkness, there will be a link in the show notes. Highly recommend you give him a follow because he's got one of the best Instagram pages out there.
Thank you, man.
With that said, Warren, let's go ahead and talk about this book, Collecting Simpsons. All right, let me get this name right because it is a long name.
It is a long name.
Collecting the Simpsons, the merchandise and legacy of our favorite nuclear family.
Yes.
We got it on display here. I know that you did a very interesting episode on Simpsons Greater Than where you had your co-host interview you about the book.
Yeah.
I think it was a little self-centered, but it worked out pretty well.
I would like to say that was Brandon's idea. To anyone listening, that was Brandon's idea.
It was a good idea. I was like, damn, my man really named one of his episodes Warren Evans.
Hey.
Yeah, it works, right?
Got to stick to the format.
It should have been Warren Evans, published author. I think that would have really set it off. But
True.
You've spoken probably ad nauseum about the book. I don't really want to have you regurgitate a lot of that, but I understand that we need to set the groundwork, the foundation. So very obvious question here. How did the book come together? Who are your collaborators and who is the publisher?
So this book, it's kind of funny because this is something, and when I've talked about this in the past, like, people love to say like, oh, and this happened and it was so serendipitous and everything just fell into place. And it, things rarely work out that way, but this is an instance where it actually did. And the reason I say that is because this is a project, speaking of my podcast, I interviewed a man by the name of Robert W. Getz pretty early on in the show. I think he was like episode 47, maybe something like that in the 40s. And the reason Robert is known among Simpsons collectors is he wrote these books about Simpsons collecting in the late 90s. And what they basically are is like collector guides, right? Like they kind of walk through the different eras of merchandise at that time, which was a very new thing. It shows you the different stuff from different countries, stuff from different companies, whatever, all this different stuff.
And this was like a first of its kind, right?
Yeah, there was like not a lot of stuff like this because the show was very new. Collecting it would have also been very new. You're talking less than 10 years old at this point as far as like merchandise for the show. And, to collectors, Robert's a really interesting guy because without those books, there's so many things that people would know about or that would sort of be lost to time. So he really did like a service for collectors when he made those. And I always like to give him his flowers because I feel like he doesn't get enough credit. And I say that to the point that when I interviewed him, he said no one had ever interviewed him.
Oh, wow.
So no one really ever cared enough to like get his story or understand how they came together. So, I guess that's just a feather in my cap. But because I have such respect for what Robert did, I told myself like, someone else needs to do this sort of thing one day. And Robert even joked with me that, he was clearly referring to me, but he's like, oh, somebody needs to do another book, And so when I had that conversation with him, I was like, maybe that is something that I would love to do one day. Like who knows how or when, or, how I raise support for that, how I do it, whatever. So I knew I wanted to do it. Around that same time, maybe a year later, I interviewed Lydia from the Simpsons Theory on my podcast, and we kind of hit it off. We had a lot in common as far as our fandom and just like interest in like the granular details of, the Simpsons in general, whether it be the show, the merchandise, whatever. And shortly after that interview, she reached out to me and was like, hey, I should also mention she came on to promote a book. They had done a book previously. And she said, we were thinking about doing another book, but it's a book that we would really want to do with you. It'd be all about the merchandise and the history. Is that something you would be interested in? And at that time, it's like, well, it's like you're reading my mind, of course, because it's something I already would like to do. So that project got kickstarted, and they already had a publisher because of their previous book, Mango Publishing out of Florida, Miami, Florida. And so they got me in touch with them. We pitched the idea to them. They loved the idea, and we started working on the book. So again, it's like one of these things that truly did just come together perfectly, magically, I guess.
And how long between you guys finalizing the contract to release? For me, I kind of knew the behind the scenes stuff.
You kind of knew a long time ago.
Yeah, you gave me a lot of the inside scoop. But to the public, you just announced the book, I think, this year, right?
Yeah, like a month ago. And that was sort of by choice. So I guess in all reality, we could have said a long time ago, like, hey, we're working on a book. But the thing about a book like this is there's so many moving parts. Like, I'm not writing it by myself. I'm writing it with two other people. We're dividing chapters amongst each other and like trying to decide who should write what and why. And then we're looking at each other's work, improving each other's work, working on everything together. And then you also have to think about the photos. You have to think about the length of the book. You have to think about, production, like release date, all of these things come into play. So I just really wanted to keep it under wraps until we knew specifics. So in my mind, it's like, well, if I can't even tell someone when it comes out, then why would I announce it? So it was almost, in fact, I think it's a little over 2 years from the actual idea to announcement that we were working on this project sort of in secret.
And James and Lydia had already published a book about the Simpsons. It was the
Simpsons Secret. Yeah. And it was sort of just like, it was a really cool book that explained like the phenomenon that many people, sort of misunderstand about like Simpsons predictions. It's sort of just like, it's like poking fun at the idea that they predict things and sort of explaining how these things get misconstrued as predictions. It's a really fun book. Anyone listening to this is not like, this is obviously supposed to be about this book, but I also recommend while you're buying mine, you also buy their last book. It's fun.
Come on,
it's really fun.
You can't say Warren don't look out for his collaborators.
Come on, you got to look out for your people.
So they already had gone through. They've already went through the process of making one book. So for them, this was sort of second. They had some legs underneath them. This was completely brand new to you. What was maybe the biggest culture shock or learning curve for you? Yo, this is Botter. Sorry for interrupting this episode, but I'll keep it brief. I wanted to let you know about a massive sale we have going on over at the Shortbox store on all of our merchandise and apparel. That's theshortboxstore.bigcartel.com. You can now save 20% off your entire order using the discount code YOO, Y-O-O. So if you've been waiting for the right time to finally buy that gauntlet snapback, or if you ever wanted to buy any of the shirts you see me wear on the podcast, well, now's your chance to get them for a steal. We still have a few sizes left of everything, thing, but they won't last long. And once they're gone, they are gone. And then I mentioned that all of our apparel is screen printed on high quality material. None of that heat transfer or direct to garment stuff. Our shirts are some of the most comfortable ones you'll ever wear, and the hats look even better in person. So wear your support for the Shortbox Nation proudly, knowing that you're going to look damn good doing it. Get to theshortboxstore.bigcartel.com as soon as you can, and don't forget to use that discount code YOO, Y-O-O, to save 20% off your entire order. All of this information can be found in this episode's show notes if you want to get there faster. Thanks for not pressing fast forward. Now back to the show.
You know, I didn't really know what to expect. So obviously doing this Instagram for almost 10 years, or I guess 10 years at this point, going on 11, something like that. What is time, Botter? Who knows what time is? It's 10 years or so. And I've always, I felt like I've been decent with words, in my life, like I can write a good caption, I was decent with book reports in school. So I felt confident that I could put together a book, because I know enough about this stuff, and I felt like I could sort of tell the story of this merchandise. But to me, the biggest shock and like the hardest part is the way you start to overthink every decision you make. So, you would sit down for X amount of hours in a day, try to get so much ground covered in chapter whatever you're in, and you feel pretty good about it. You're like, oh, that feels nice. I read back over that. I feel like I'm saying what I want to say. I feel like I'm getting somewhere. And then you could come back to that same thing the next day and think, what in the hell was I thinking when I wrote this? This sounds so dumb. So I think the biggest shock to me is just, learning to, it's kind of like podcasting in a way, like learning to not overanalyze every decision you make in a creative project will ultimately save you a lot of anxiety and stress, but it'll also, make you less miserable as you work on a project. So I think to me, it was just like learning to let the work be the work and not always double back,
I thought that was interesting when you told me that you were going to be writing chapters, because I think originally, maybe the original scope or maybe how I interpreted it was that they were going to rely on your collection, which, makes sense. You've basically, I feel like you've got everything I could ever think of Simpsons wise. So I thought maybe they were just leveraging you for the collection. But when you were like, hey, I'm actually going to be writing chapters, I was like, damn, that's a really cool opportunity, like to be more involved, like directly involved with the book. I guess, could you speak a little bit about how the photos came together? Because, your feed is really well curated. I think your eye for design, you've got a knack for design, an eye for design. The feed is really well done, but you actually sought professional services for the photography. And I got to say, man, your feed is good, your eye is good, but the photography in this book is another level.
I have to give a huge shout out to the photographer, because not only is she incredibly talented, but she's also a dear friend of mine, Caroline Walker Evans. And when I first, saw this project finally getting to the point where I knew it was real, she's the first person I thought of. She's the first person I reached out to. And I said, hey, Caroline, I'm doing a book. I would love to involve you, because I think what you do and what you've done professionally is like perfect for this book. Like your experience with product photography, your experience with portraits, I think all of that comes into play for how I visualize and how I see this book. And, I couldn't have been more, like, I will never forget. So Caroline lives in Seattle. We grew up in the same area. We're both from Mississippi. She's married to my best friend. Shout out to Daly. And so I've known Caroline for a very long time, but we live on opposite sides of the country. Like, you can fly to London in less time than you can fly to Seattle. It's fucking far away. So, when I talked to her about the actual project, I said, the only thing is you'll have to come here. Like, are you okay to come here and do it? So Caroline stayed with me for a week. And the moment she took the first photo, I was like, I could have done cartwheels. I was like, oh yeah, this is it. Like, this is exactly what I wanted. This is exactly how I saw it in my brain. And, anyone can buy a nice camera and take pretty decent photos. But the thing that a professional and someone as talented as Caroline brings to the table that I have to highlight, because, Botter said that I'm pretty good at taking photos. I can't stress how important this is when you're taking professional photos of toys. I mean, you're talking about a lot of plastic. You're talking about stuff that reflects a lot of light.
Contours and all that.
You need someone that really knows how to make that work, who knows how to, and Caroline would do the craziest shit. Like, she knows the tricks of the trade. Like, she would take a photo. I would go, oh, that looks great. And she'd be like, well, I don't really like this glare down here in the bottom right. So can you stand right here with this umbrella? And I'm like, I mean, I guess so, And then she takes the photo again and she goes, okay, there we go. That's what I wanted. And I go and I look and it starts clicking with me. I'm like, holy shit, you got rid of all of those problems by knowing how to direct this, And this is really, I know this is like super deep, nerdy level stuff about photos, but it blew my mind to see someone with that skill set. Because again, you think, oh, well, someone has a nice enough camera, they set up a decent enough studio, they can take good photos. But there's so much more to it. And getting to work with someone like Caroline, I mean, I feel like it's made me better. Like, you talk about the Instagram feed, I feel like it makes my photos better now just from doing that.
How are you going to celebrate? Where are you going to be December 5th when the book comes out? Now, granted, this episode drops the Wednesday after the book comes out. So we're doing a little bit of time travel here, but where will you be December 5th when the book comes out?
This is like so boring and unexciting to say on the podcast, but because I didn't think about the day that it came out in terms of my normal schedule, I'll be selling records at Tiger Records.
I'll be at my day job.
Yeah. So I guess this is the shout out special. Shout out to Tiger Records. Yeah. If you want to see me on the release day and you live in Jacksonville, I'll be selling records there. Hopefully I'll have some copies of the book with me.
I guess I always imagine, like, if I should ever get to the point where I could drop a book or write my own comic book, I imagine myself being at the comic shop an hour before they open, knowing that there is no line, but I'm there an hour before they open. I've got fireworks and sprinklers. I'm probably setting up a little booth of my book. Like, you want me to sign that for you? You want me to sign that for you?
I mean, I will say, like, I'm definitely going to make some time to, like, go try to find the book before I go into Tiger. But at the same time, like, just knowing that it's going to be in the world on that day is enough for me. Like, I think in my mind, I was like, maybe we try to throw like a little party, or we try to do like a trivia, get like in my mind, I was like, maybe I try to set up this whole thing. But I think one of the things about what I do online and with Bart of Darkness that makes this, a little bit easier for me, and it's kind of special in that way, is that, the fact that I have an audience or people that actually care about what I work on makes me less concerned about that. Like, I feel like I've kind of been celebrating it since I announced it, and that makes it a little bit easier. So, as much as I would have loved to plan some big thing, I'm just glad that it's going to be out in the world now.
That's cool. And if you could go back in time 2 years ago, as you're just getting started, and give yourself a piece of advice to make your life infinitely easier, what would you tell yourself?
I would tell myself,
like, run.
No. I would tell myself to. So it's interesting with this book because, we took the photos first because we felt like we needed to, understand visually the book before we could finish writing the words. So I think if I could do it all again, I would probably take the photos to the writing instead of write to the photos. But also I think, and this kind of goes for any creative project. Like, you can apply this to a podcast. You can apply it to anything you're working on. Don't be so hard on yourself, because I think throughout the process of making anything, and especially this book, I would second guess some of the things that I was doing with the book. Like, I would think, is that how I want to say that? Am I covering enough stuff in this first chapter? Am I talking about enough of this or enough of that? So I think I would just be a little kinder to myself and stress less when it came to the overall, compiling of this information, because when you do something like this, you have to acknowledge early that you can't cover everything. Like, that's if you go into it expecting too much of yourself, you're doomed to fail. So that's where I'm at.
How are Lydia and James feeling about the book?
I think we all, because we were so in tune with each other in this process, and we all felt so, how do I say this? I guess along the course of it, I feel like we were constantly syncing up our expectations. And what I mean by that is every time we were, unhappy with something or didn't like the way one part of it was panning out or whatever it may be, I feel like we were always on the same page. And while I'm giving love to Caroline, I also have to give a lot of love to James and Lydia because we spent so much time on Zoom. And, we also spent a lot of time giving each other notes about our different parts of the book and all of these things. And if you think about that, especially when you're talking through a screen or you're talking through text or whatever, you can sort of butt heads. And fortunately for all of us, we usually agreed. Like all of their notes made my chapters better. I think my notes made their chapters better. I think we really found like a creative click over the course of making this book. So, I think we all are equally relieved and excited that not only it's finished, but that we made sure we were happy with the finished product.
Well said, man. Well said. Can I also give a compliment to James? I don't know if you've ever looked at his Amazon author page, but my man is looking mad brolic. Have you ever seen it?
I have. And so,
I'm like, damn, did Warren team up with Clark Kent?
Shout out to James. We hung out in person late last year while we were in London, and my man clearly hits the gym. James takes care. He's I aspire for his level of discipline. He takes care of himself.
Yeah, I love that. All right. Once again, the book is called Collecting the Simpsons, the Merchandise and Legacy of Our Favorite Nuclear Family. How about we go ahead and dive into the book?
Let's do it.
I guess we've been diving into the book the whole time, but let's get into the actual pages.
Let's do it.
One of my first questions comes down to this content page, because what I was not expecting, and I think this is safe to say with a lot of like coffee table books, and I own a few. They're not really books that you read, right? Like you look at the pretty pictures, you might occasionally flip through it when you're having coffee or you got guests over. It's more like a statement piece.
Sure.
And what I enjoyed about this book was that it's definitely that. Like it looks good. You can flip through it, just appreciate the pictures. But I was surprised by how many chapters are in this book and how much exposition and write-up is in this book. I was like thoroughly impressed that, and I guess it made sense the more I was like, oh, so that's why the process took so long. And, he was having all these sleepless nights because you really had to be an author. Yeah.
And what I will say that's, and this was big for myself, James, and Lydia. I talk about those Robert Getz books, and I recommend those to everyone that listens to this. They really, if you're interested in Simpsons collecting, they are the Bible. Like there are things in that book that I wouldn't even know exist without those books. But the thing about his books is there's not a lot of writing. It's like 95% photos. And when we came up with this idea, we really wanted to toe that line. Like we want this to be a book that you can look at and mostly just look at the photos and flip through and be like, oh, that's cool. That's cool. We wanted it to be a book you don't have to read, but we want there to also be this like added thing of, oh, well, if I do read it, I'm not only going to see the photos, but I'm going to learn about the things in the photos, and I'm going to get like some actual history about some of the controversy and some of the things that, is a big part of Simpsons merchandise. So I think finding a way to do both was like key to us. And I feel like we did that.
I would say this much. I learned a lot. Like I'm not just saying that as a blanket statement, but I genuinely learned so much about the Simpsons. And truth be told, I've only gotten past chapter 5. So I'm about 150 pages in, which is a little less than half the book. The book is sitting at, I think, a little bit over north of 300 pages. But it is taking me a long time to finish it because there is a lot to consume and read. But I'm enjoying the process because I'm learning a lot. So looking at some of the contents in the chapters, in the book, you guys cover toys, obviously, clothing and fashion, home media, books, comics, fast food, food and drink, board games, video game, music, lost toys, the real Simpsons house, Universal Studios, and I'm assuming you probably wrote this last chapter, chapter 14, how to start a collection.
Yeah. And truth be told, how to start a collection is my favorite chapter in the book, just because, throughout the course of the book, and it's also important to mention that when we came up with all the chapters, like when we narrowed down like the things we wanted to talk about, we sort of had to divide them up in a way that made sense. And we sort of had to be like, okay, well, James and Lydia were like, well, you're the collector here. Obviously, you know a lot about the toys and like just the general merchandise. We really think that's your space. Like you should really tackle that. That also is the longest chapter, I believe, is the toy chapter. Okay. Aside from maybe the video games, but that's long because we talk about every video game. It's like one of the only chapters where we actually do kind of talk about everything. So, we're dividing these up and we're trying to decide like who should say what. So by the time we got to the how to start a collection, it's also the last thing I wrote. And it just feels like it's the most it's the most from me and not just stories or history or information. So it's the one that's a little more personal to me. It's kind of, you know, more from the heart, I guess.
What is your favorite chapter that you did not write?
You know, I gotta give it to Lydia, and that is the clothing and fashion. And the reason I say that is, and I think you know, James wrote some wonderful chapters for the book. No shade to James, but the clothing and fashion, you know, whereas the toy chapter that the book starts on is like, here's some stuff, and then here's some more stuff, and then here's some more stuff. It's sort of walking you through the timeline. When you get to the clothing and fashion, it's less of that and more so like when Simpsons became a merchandised property and when the clothing started coming out, there was a lot of controversy, and it really digs into like schools banning the shirts, you know, President Bush openly complaining about the Simpsons and things like that. So it really digs into like something a lot bigger than just here are some cool shirts and here are some cool ties. And you get really cool photos of merch, but it digs into like a lot more. It talks about staff gifts. It talks about all of these like little things that, you know, a collection book would miss, I think. So I like that it's sort of not what you expect, because you get all this sort of timeline stuff with toys, and then you move into like, you know, more of a history lesson.
And going back to what I said about, you know, like genuinely learning some interesting lessons and facts about The Simpsons, the band Bart shirt, which I was not aware of its history or its, you know, impact to pop culture. But the shirt right here that I've got on the screen, Bart Simpson, underachiever and proud of it, man. Banned in schools. Yeah. I mean, I guess there was an attempt to ban it in schools.
Yeah.
Right?
And I mean, it's not only, you know, the messaging is like, you know,
which seems so tame now, right?
It does seem tame. But I mean, I guess you can, if you put yourself in the position of a parent in the early 90s, maybe you're less encouraged by like a cartoon character sort of glorifying your kid not trying. Like, and you know, not to mention he's holding a slingshot at the person looking at the shirt. So it's kind of like, you know, the shirt is very aggressive. If you think about it, it's like, you know, I'm an underachiever. I don't give a shit. Why are you looking at me? I'll hit you with a slingshot. It's very like, you know, it's a gripping shirt. And I think it's one of the coolest things about the show is that it had that edge when it came out. But, you know, you can kind of understand why some parents who hadn't actually watched the show see this and they assume it's very bad for their kids' development. You know, I'm not taking up for the parents, but I vividly remember being a kid and this era of their merchandise being very, you know, sort of a hot topic.
It says here that these original band t-shirts from 1989 have only catapulted in value, and you could be looking to spend upwards of $150.
Absolutely.
That's still the case, huh?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of this stuff, especially these early shirts, you know, we all know how wild like the vintage market can be. And like, that's across anything, sports memorabilia, you know, anything. Like you'll pay a pretty penny for certain things. Like, you know, Bart and I, obviously Jacksonville, big Jaguars fans, some of that vintage Jaguar stuff, especially now that we're good. Any Titans fans listening, turn it off. You know, now that we're good, like you'll pay some big money for some of those things, you know? And so, especially with a show as iconic as The Simpsons, and because of sort of the controversy attached to some of those early designs, you know, I mean, they were putting out shirts for, you know, I mean, I guess not really for kids, but the kids were buying that said, "I'm Bart Simpson. Who the hell are you?" I mean, you know, just when you think about the weight of that and the time it came out, like people want to own those. So they go for if they're clean, you can sell them for big bucks.
I almost foolishly asked if you had one. I'm like, this whole book is everything that he owns.
I sadly have too many, and I have several that are like have never been worn. I own several like dead stock original shirts, which is
Warren, let's talk about a size large. All right, we'll talk. You know, I feel like we completely overlooked the fact that Yardley Smith, voice of Lisa Simpson, wrote you a very beautiful, I guess, what do you call that? Like
you would call it a blurb, but at the same time, her blurb was so much more than a blurb that it became like one of the first pages in the book. So that's really special that Yardley was kind enough to not only say like, "Hey, this is great, you should buy it," but to like write, you know, a paragraph really praising the whole project. I mean, it is crazy to see photos of my stuff because, you know, everything, you know, nothing lasts forever. You know what I mean? Something could happen one day and I could lose my collection, or my house could burn down, or, you know, you never know. And so the fact that my collection and this like time in my life is sort of, I don't know, it sort of exists now in this like book, like it's for all I guess for as long as the planet is here, is kind of special to me. It's like, sort of, it's encapsulated in this like protective little jacket forever. And I can still look at it if something were to ever happen. So that's a cool thing to think about. But in addition to that, and seeing, the support from people from the show, we didn't even talk about how Bill Morrison wrote the foreword for this book, which I'm here to be honest on the show. When Bill sent me the foreword and was like, hey, let me know what you think. Let me know if you like it. I almost shed a tear. It really is like it's so much more than I expected. He tells like a really personal story about his mom. It's fantastic. So, shout out to Bill, co-founder of Bongo Comics, guest on my show a couple of times, guest on the Short Box, just a true legend in the Simpsons land. Was nice enough to do the forward for the book. So it's just crazy to see all this stuff.
I was happy to see that his knack with words was just as impressive. He's just as talented with his words as his, like his pen game, drawing. I guess, and I'm getting kind of ahead, and I think I keep trying to encapsulate it all, but this book is such, aside from, like I said, it just being a beautiful looking book and, finding like merch that you probably have never seen and really getting into detail about your collection, the overall retrospective of the Simpsons and the celebration of like what it means, and like, you're kind of getting like a history lesson. There's no way that you guys wouldn't cover the show and its impact on pop culture and in the world, and it's done really well. I think at the end of the book, in the conclusion or the afterword, you guys, I think it was like a team effort, but you guys write, there's no denying that there are those more qualified to write about the making of the show. So we felt it important to write a book from our own perspective, a consumer perspective, to focus on the Simpsons' cultural impact and how it affected merchandise. And yeah, and you still were able to weave in like the story of the Simpsons through that unique perspective. I thought that was like a really cool way to tackle, telling something new or giving a fresh perspective.
Well, to me too, it's interesting because, when this book was first conceived, I do think in my mind, it was, more of a collector guide. Like my initial thought was like, okay, we're going to take a bunch of photos of my stuff. We're going to talk about all of that stuff. And then it's going to, sort of teach people about some of the stuff. What the book came to be, and this is what I think is so cool about it, is it's almost saying that collecting the Simpsons is more than just collecting the merchandise, because, we go into all this detail about the real Simpsons house, which gives you like this like crazy story of a giveaway the show did. We also talk about Universal Studios, which is, you can't collect Universal Studios, but so much merchandise has come from Universal Studios, and understanding like this part of the fandom is just another chapter to like, no pun intended, to collecting this thing. And so to me, I think it's cool that it's in my mind, it was a book about collecting, and it became more than that, but is somehow still also that.
Do you feel like there was a chapter that you could have easily doubled up on, or even just made a whole book about?
I fully think I could have made this book 3 times as long.
Wow.
And that was one thing that we talked about a lot, and a lot of things had to get cut. There's a lot of photos that didn't even make the book. To anyone listening that, if you're listening to this after you've seen the book, there's a lot of photos in it.
How many photos in total, just rough ballpark estimate, you think the photographer took?
Easily 500 or 600 or 700. Like there's no way it's less than that. Like truthfully, it could be 1,000, because there's so many photos of each thing to make sure you get the best possible one. Or like, we would set up something and then take it one way and then move a couple things and take it another way and then decide which one was better. So, the true number is probably closer to 1,500 or something. But if I'm being just, conservative, easily 600 or 700, 800 photos. But I say that to say there's so many that are not even in the book, because we either ended up not having time to talk about it, or it just didn't seem as relevant. Because again, and you'll see us say this throughout the book, we knew we couldn't cover everything, so we had to sort of dial it back and make it a little more broad. But if it were up to me, and who knows what the future holds, I would go into much more detail about a lot more things. Like I would talk more about international products than I was able to. I would talk even more about household products. I would talk even more about prototypes and samples. There's like always more to talk about. So, look at this as like a broad walkthrough of just how big the merchandise is.
And I'm going to stick to on this clothing chapter because I think this might be, aside from the comics chapter, which we might go into next, I think the clothing chapter is maybe my favorite one.
It's great.
The bootleg Bart, little blurb or chapter in part was very eye-opening because I've seen, I think we've all seen like the bootleg Bart shirts, especially like when, they've got him as like Bart Sanchez or like they've got him with like the dreads and all that. I didn't know that there was that many subcultures and subgenres to it.
It's wild.
Oh, Black Bart. Yeah, obviously just Black Bart. I've seen so many Black Bart shirts, but I didn't know about like the this Bart versus Rambart.
Yeah. And there's so many. With again, like, we talk about how much more we could say about each thing. Like we could do a whole book, probably as long as this one, just about the clothing. And that's a fact. Like, I mean, there's so many crazy. We didn't even really get to dig into like sports bootlegs, which is like one of my favorite things. And I wish that there would, again, there's just not time to talk about every little thing. And that's the line that we had to walk. But I'm proud that we did, honestly, because
you got to put barriers up.
Yeah. And I think it gives people, a broad idea, and it teaches people a lot without, if you get too granular, it's almost too much to take in, All
right. Question for you then. What is your favorite sub-genre of Simpsons merch or your favorite bootleg?
So
I don't know if those go hand in hand, so you can answer them separately or together.
Favorite subgenre, you mean as in like type of merchandise,
sure,
right?
Yeah.
So for me, and I've said this for as long as I can remember, whenever I get a question about like, what do you look for specifically? I love all the weird ceramics and all the weird like stuff from Europe and Japan and France and just like all these like interesting international pieces, because one thing, and that's why I say I wish I could have spent more time on that, because there are so many amazing products that are not from America. And I would argue that in most cases, some of the more interesting products come from other places, Australia, Italy, France. Like some of the coolest stuff that we know about comes from other places and outside of America, which is where the show was created. So those are the things that really fire me up, especially, like I said, the ceramics, the butter dishes, the salt and pepper shakers. I just think that stuff is such a window into a time, right? Like you don't really see these sort of products in this way anymore. And you don't really see shows merchandised the way Simpsons and things like it were, Star Wars, Ninja Turtles, etc.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't see this sort of phenomenon nearly as often. So those sort of things really kind of show you that the most. So those are the things that really grab me when I'm trying to find stuff. And as far as a bootleg, like to me, it is the sports ones, I just love how bad some of them are. And I think that is like,
there's a charm to it.
There's a charm to that. And there's a charm to the idea that some guy was standing under the bridge on the way to the stadium being like, hey, get your Bart, 49er shirt, get your Bart Iowa Hawkeyes shirt. Like there's something so cool about that. So those things always really fire me up.
If you had the opportunity to go to another country, specifically to, dig and hunt for Simpsons merch that is native to that country, what country are you going to just for a Simpsons hunting spree?
I think it honestly is a tie. And I think it would be, I always talk about the stuff from France, but at the same time, like we know so much about that stuff because so many collectors do really like it. And there's, it's not that vast of a thing because, I think most of the stuff that I know about, we all know about. I don't think there's any like hidden secrets there, but I think Japan and Australia would be two of the places where there's got to be so much stuff that we still don't know about. And there's so much stuff that's like, Australia people, shout out to Four Finger Discount. I was on that show recently twice. And they are a testament to just how much people in Australia love The Simpsons. I would argue that people in Australia might love the show more than anyone. Like it's honestly remarkable how strong their fan base is there. And the same can be said for the merchandise. They had their own style of merchandise. It's unlike any other merchandise in the world. It's truly so different. Like the types of things they made, the way the packaging looked, they always had the kids playing sports. It's just like so unique. So I think between those two places, there's got to be so many things that I could still uncover. So that's on my priority list for sure.
Going back to this book, let me tell you another thing that was like profound. And I guess I got to give props to James since he wrote the home media chapter. The way that the photos were shot for the VHSs, I have never wanted to just go out and buy a bunch of just physical. His chapter just made me appreciate the VHSs and the DVDs a lot.
Totally.
It got me thinking about like my pops coming home with like a new movie that was a VHS, and then when DVDs started happening, like just how excited we were to like get this and then like hold it and we'd pass it around and all that. But he makes a comment about the I think he dedicates a good bit of it to DVD commentary, and he makes a remark, and I'm going to butcher it, but he basically akins the DVD behind the scenes commentary to podcasts before they were podcasts.
Absolutely.
And reading that was like man, he's fucking right. And I wanted to hear from you. What is your favorite Simpsons DVD, just based solely on the commentary and the behind the scenes extra?
That's an interesting one. And I want to say before I answer that, talking about how much that photo of the VHS makes you want it, I just want to say another reason it's so perfect that Bill Morrison wrote the foreword is he did like all of that box art. Like,
wow.
I mean, he did tons of art throughout the book. I would argue like so much of what we talk about in the book was done by Bill. So much of the stuff in the toy chapter, so much of this stuff. I know those VHS sets, Bill did all of them. So I just want to throw that out. It's like, it's so fitting that he did the foreword. I was asked this question recently. About
who's asking you my questions? This is an old question. Dang, I thought I had something like new.
No, I mean, it is a good question, and what I was going to say is that when I was asked this originally, I couldn't really come up with anything, and it was actually Brandon who reminded me that the Who Shot Mr. Burns commentaries are like so good, and it's because they go into detail about how when that was all going on. They tried to like leak the answer. They tried to get like answers to the contest in like tabloids and stuff to try to stir up some controversy about the show. And even these like grimy tabloids were like, oh no, we don't want to spoil the show,
Oh, wow.
And
honor amongst these.
And so you learn like these crazy stories that you really wouldn't hear anywhere else. I guess you could hear them now on podcasts, now that everyone goes on podcasts. But like there was a time where this was the only place you were getting stories like this, especially from the writers, especially from the producers. So you can't really go wrong, but you want to go listen to those for sure. Who Shot Mr. Burns, a classic. Everyone loves those episodes. If you don't think they're in the top 10, you're watching the wrong show.
Do you think it's a shame that none of these, outside of just living on the DVDs, that none of these have been like digitized for, I guess, audio consumption? I mean, I guess is any of that out there?
It's sad that Disney has not done that. And what I will say is when they did Simpsons World, like when they used to have that website, this is like before Disney owned the Simpsons. This used to be like one of the ways you could stream it. It was through like FX.
Okay.
And there was a time where a lot of those commentaries were on there and you could listen to them. But no one has, and this is something I know a lot of people want, but maybe there's like some sort of weird crossover, like contract issue with who owns the rights to those. I have no idea. Or maybe they don't want to have to pay more to the writers by featuring them on Disney. I have no idea what it is. But I mean, putting them on Disney Plus seems like a no-brainer. Like, why not make the most of that? And why not record new ones for the seasons that are not on DVD? People want that kind of shit, especially for The Simpsons.
And I will say, when you read this chapter and it talks about the feedback and reception from the fans, just from like the shift from VHS to DVDs. And then like the DVDs not being, uniform in shape and easy to display. I thought I got a good chuckle out of that because you guys go into like those nuanced things that maybe wouldn't mean anything to like the average person. They don't really, a bunch of nerds getting upset about the shape of a DVD box. But in the community, it's like, it is a thing. That's probably a thing that, everyone talks about. Like it's maybe a joke at this point.
Yeah.
I guess it's interesting that the Simpsons merch tells just as much about the history and story and the nuances of the show that even the show itself can't possibly tell.
This guy gets it. See, this Botter gets it. See, that is exact. He just said in a way that I couldn't think to say. That is what the book is. Like it's showing you that the merchandise is more than just here's this, here's that, here's this. There's like stories and history that people have with these objects. Like it's more than just like, people don't need a collector guide. They have Google. This is like reminding you of like a time in your life where you're like, oh, you know what? I remember getting that Homer shaped head and being really pissed off about it, because you couldn't even stack it on the shelf. You had to lay it down or turn it on its side. And I just think being able to like unlock memories for people. Like that's something I always talk about. That's like the whole point of my Instagram, being able to unlock a memory for someone, whether it be like a good one or like one that was locked far, far away, that connects to an object is fun. That's a cool thing to do. Like who doesn't love like, finding lost memories? Does that make sense?
No, it does. And you won't hear a complaint from me. So I want to kind of quickly move on because I don't want to go through the whole book and everyone's like, all right, I guess I got my book. It wouldn't be right if we didn't touch on. This is kind of a tie for my favorite chapter. Now, granted, like I said, I'm only halfway through. I'm sure this list will change, but I read the comic section last night, like really late at night. And I was like, maybe I could just skip this and, read it in the morning. But I got so hooked into finishing this chapter. It was a long ass chapter for the record.
Yeah.
But man, and you know what? I've had you on the show to talk about Bongo Comics. I've spoken to Bill Morrison about it. And I still learned so much. And what I'll try to say about this chapter in general, the biggest takeaway that I got was just how integral comic books were to really to like the foundation and the start of the Simpsons.
Yeah.
And I guess it really all starts with Matt Groening's what was the strip? Life is Hell?
Life is Hell. Yeah.
I did not know that started as a zine.
Life in Hell, Life is Hell. There's like they're called a lot of different things. There's School is Hell, Life is Hell. There's lots of things.
Like I knew that was like his first, thing, like the thing that put him on the map, and then obviously, crushed it with the Simpsons. But I guess I never really knew the in between, like the nuance, the connective tissue there, and the fact that you could really pinpoint it to Matt Groening. And this is something that we always talk about on the show, right? Like these stories of creators creating their thing, like this out of a passion. So he creates like the comic strip, puts it out via zine, and that gets his name. That catches the attention of an executive, and they give him a shot at doing animated, doing the bumpers for the Tracy Ullman show. It's like, damn, that all started with the fucking zine.
And what's even crazier about it?
Awesome.
And what's even crazier about it to me, and this is something that I feel like everyone knows, but people don't think about it enough, is they wanted to make a show out of Life is Hell. Like that's what they wanted. Like that's what Matt was there to pitch. And he was so precious about those rabbits. And this is, the story goes, who knows how, I say this all the time, but who knows how true this really is, but this is the myth, is that he like doodled the family in the waiting room, before the meeting and was like, no, I think we should do a show about these guys. But Life is Hell is like, not only did he keep making it for a long time, but it was like very precious to him. Like I think he made it until 2015. So even while The Simpsons was like one of the biggest things in the world, he kept doing the strip. And, I will say that as someone who went back and didn't know about Life is Hell in the beginning, but someone who went back to it as an adult and really dug in, it's truly like you see the humor there. You see what the Simpsons became. You see the building blocks in those early strips, and they're dark, they're funny, they're kind of sad sometimes. Like they're really introspective and fantastic in a way that I don't know if enough people have taken the time to go back and look, but they're really, really great.
And I guess that's what I'm trying to say is I went into it thinking that, oh yeah, I know about Life is Hell, the two rabbits, kind of, I guess maybe I went into it thinking that was throwaway projects, or not throwaway, but like a side piece. And it's like, oh, The Simpsons is where I'm, that's my bread and butter, that's my true love. But reading this, it kind of pivoted that where it's like, oh no, he was so protective about these rabbits. He was like, oh, let's do a show about these guys, like kind of like a kind of, not, I won't say a bait and switch because obviously it worked out well for him. But that to know that it all really started with a fucking zine.
Yeah.
That kind of blew my mind.
Yeah.
And then really, what this chapter does is really emphasizes the care, and I guess, and the love and the appreciation that the entire, I think it said to the entire like Simpsons team, but specifically like Matt Groening and Bill Morrison, like the love they put into the Bongo comics. Because admittedly, if I'm being real with you, growing up, I've definitely come across a few of these. And I remember thinking as a kid, like anything that was like a TV show comic, I kind of just always wrote off as like, I just watched the show. But, obviously meeting you and talking to Bill Morrison, I have a new sense of appreciation for that. But you read this chapter and you're like, nah, these guys were serious about making quality comics, like, putting their love of comic books, wearing that on their sleeves, and the amount of books. I didn't know that there was, they started with so many titles like Radioactive Man, Bart, just the Simpsons family comic. Am I missing one more?
Yeah, Treehouse of Horror, like, all of these Itchy and Scratchy, They did so many little subgenres of comics. It's really wild. And what you say is a great point because, there's a big difference in like, people think about Matt's early beginning. We talk about life in hell. I always say life is hell because he did Love is Hell, School is Hell. And I think maybe some of them are called Life is Hell, but the first one was Life in Hell. Like that's the actual name. But when he was doing that, people think of that and they're like, oh, he did this little comic strip. But you can tell when you look at those that Matt loved comic books. You can tell that there was like a profound love there, but he was just doing this little, black and white strip. What he was able to do with Simpsons comics and before that Simpsons Illustrated is it was like his first shot to do something he had always wanted to do in a more real way. It's like, okay, I'm not just doing a zine or a comic strip. I'm going to do a real comic book. And the matchup of him and Bill Morrison and Stephen Cindy Vance and the whole team is such a magical thing because people forget. And I'm sure a lot of people grew up with the comics, but they also, maybe they never cared about them. Maybe they assumed they were just, replicated versions of episodes or something. Who knows? Maybe people just looked over them. But when you realize that the comics went on for so long, like they were like a touchstone for some people, there's probably people out there that had stopped watching the show, but kept buying the comics, and you gotta think that that's possible. So the comics are like their own world. And like, again, you could do a whole book about the comics. So it's such a vast world within a vast world within a vast world. And that's like kind of the hard part about making a book like this, but also the fun part. You have so much stuff to talk.
I think I got just a bigger respect for the Simpsons comics after, this particular chapter, because not only did I really understand the role that, Life in Hell or Life is Hell played into the whole creation of the Simpsons, it also made me appreciate that this medium makes sense for the Simpsons, like to tell continued stories. And they weren't just trying to, repeat, plots and stories from the show. They had like full range to tell unique stories. And one in particular that, thanks to the book that it put on my radar, is this particular issue of Simpsons Comics, number 13, where they tell, I guess the overall premise is Bart and Milhouse create their own comic called Oyster Man. And it's about, what is it? It says, they're shocked to find the same professionals stole their idea. Yeah, I guess a bunch of professionals called their idea stupid, only to steal the idea, make millions off it. And it's kind of a commentary on the comic book industry. And like, wow, obviously the folks writing the books and this particular story are very well aware of the industry and are making commentary about it.
Yeah. And the fact that they were able to do something like that, like with, a property like The Simpsons, that's like part of what makes this so amazing. And we did a whole episode about Radioactive Man once, and we've talked so much about that, but what they were able to do was so many different things, like give us commentary on the industry, but also make fun of the tropes, but also expand what the show was doing, keep those characters true to the show. Like all these little things, they took such care. And that is why the comics mean more to me now than even when I was younger, because now I like see just how much time and work went into those comics. And something I've also said thousands of times is you're not going to see the Simpsons look better than in some of these drawings. Like, so the comics are like one of the most fun places to look at these images. Yeah, I have so much love and appreciation for the comics, more so now than ever.
You've been trying to, you've always kind of drilled into my head, B, you got to check out the Treehouse of Horror series. They've got some of the biggest names in comics doing them. You've shown me plenty of examples. I should have listened to you when the Omnibus came out.
Oh, yeah.
Because if this is all in the Omnibus,
it is.
The Treehouse of Horror Omnibus,
it is.
I'm copping like immediately. Like these covers are beautiful. And then you really get to see, because I guess the whole premise is like with the Treehouse of Horror books, they were inviting other comic creators, big name, rising, even manga stars to do their own interpretation. And just a couple of preview pages, which I've got on the screen, of The Simpsons in different art style, like this manga art style blows my mind.
Yes.
Like I'm so interested now to try to like go through all of it and see who else has done their interpretation. I know like Bernie Wrightson has done a Simpsons story. This one right here, what is it? Issue 1, Bart Simpson's Treehouse of Horror. Off the rip, these are some comic book legends. Mike Allred, James Robinson, Jeff Smith.
I know.
Crazy.
It's insane that they did that. And I think, something I know Bill has talked about a lot is that, he was afraid like Matt Groening wouldn't love this idea of like letting them go so crazy and invite another artist. But Matt was all about it and he loved it. And that's like I think the Treehouse comics especially are like, if you don't want to if you don't want to dive in and have to collect hundreds and hundreds of comics, at least get the Treehouse ones, because you'll never see the show look so crazy. So many of the covers were like actual paintings that Bill Morrison did, and they're among my favorite Simpsons things that exist. We're looking at it right now, Treehouse 14, up there in the top right corner. That's like such an unbelievable cover.
You will definitely put a newfound respect on Bill Morrison's name.
Absolutely.
This man is stupid talented.
So good.
And I've had a chance to see him a few times, like at conventions in the middle of drawing a sketch or doing a remark on a Funko Pop. I think one time I even caught him like actually painting. And it's like, yo, people don't mention your name enough.
And something else about him that I anytime Bill Morrison comes up, and this is not just because he wrote the foreword for my book, I love Bill so much. I always feel the need to remind people, like, he's still doing it. Like, anyone listening that bought the Super 7 reaction figures, like, Bill did a lot of those card arts. Like, he's still to this day, like, one of the best people drawing Simpsons, if not the best. Like, no shade to anyone, no shade to Wes Archer, no shade to David Silverman, no shade to Matt Groening, but Bill is like, what I associate the most with the Simpsons is so many of those early card arts, so many of the early advertisements, all of that sort of thing. And that's all Bill. So, part of the reason we see the show the way we do and the characters the way we do in a physical space is because of Bill. So I just, I always had to put that extra respect on him.
All right. Last but not least, because like I said, I didn't go any further than this chapter, and I think this is a good drop-off point. But I feel like you've definitely mentioned the Futurama crossover comic book.
Yeah.
Did not know it was done twice.
Yeah.
Are they that good?
They're really,
How do you feel about
they're
it?
really, really good. And this is one that I'm always saying I want to like reread because it's been a while, but like, I mean, just look at those covers, man.
No, the covers
they're crazy.
Stupid nice.
And this happened way before the show. The show actually did a crossover of Futurama a couple years ago. And, to some people that was such a radical idea.
By like a wide margin. She's already interrupted. I was surprised to know that the crossover happened in the comic book 2005, but they didn't actually do the TV crossover until 2014.
Yeah. Yeah. So the fact that they were doing these sort of, when that episode of the show came out, some people were like, whoa, that's crazy. I never thought they would do that. And it's like, well, they actually, they've done this stuff before in the comics, and that's why it's so cool. And obviously it's a completely different type of story. But it's so cool to see these two properties like come together. The crossovers are great.
I was gonna fuck with you and be like, Warren, you got to say something nice about the Family Guy crossover, but I know you refuse to say anything nice about Family Guy.
No comment.
Oh, man. I'm telling you, one day I want to see a crossover of Simpsons Greater Than and whatever the biggest Family Guy podcast is.
I don't know if there's a big Family Guy podcast, but I'm willing to bet anyone who hosts that podcast is not someone I would talk to. No, listen, this is a joke I make on my show a lot, and I always like go on this whole thing when Family Guy comes up. When Family Guy first came out, I did not hate it, but my argument is always that it's aged so poorly and only ages worse and worse as it gets older. I have no like beef with people who like the show. But anytime there's like a problem with the Simpsons, like, or someone gets mad about something that happens in like a new Simpsons, people are always like, well, this is why I watch Family Guy. And this is something that Brandon and I talked about recently. To me, that's like, when I see stuff like that, I'm like, that's all I needed to know about you. I'm good.
One day I'm going to invite you on the podcast. I'm going to surprise you with I'm going to have a psychologist with me.
Oh,
and we're going to get to the root of this problem.
Yeah, let's do it.
Warren, very quickly, I'm going to give you the option to bring up maybe one chapter we can quickly scroll through. That is whatever chapter you want to go through.
I would say like maybe go through the real Simpsons house. And the reason I say that,
you go ahead and set it up. I'll find it.
The reason I say that is we're talking a lot about, merchandise. And when Lydia first, talked about making a chapter about the real Simpsons house, in my mind, that didn't make a ton of sense for like what this book was about.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think about it, like there is no like greater, grail piece to any collector than this like lost opportunity to own the Simpsons house. And the reason I say that is it's one of the most interesting stories in the world of the Simpsons.
Are these floor plans?
Yeah. I mean, they built a real house.
Oh, okay. It's related to that. Gotcha.
Yeah. So like knowing that this existed and knowing that like none of us really ever got to appreciate it because of the whole story, which I won't spoil the story. Anyone that doesn't know it should go read the chapter. But, this is like, while this is not something you can physically collect, this is like, this is like
it's like the ultimate personification.
It's like the ultimate personification of like a physical thing from the show. And so it's something that people need to know about. Like any collector needs to at least know this story, or at the very least, go visit the house now. So what I will tell you is that the house, you can't go inside of it. Someone lives in it, and it no longer looks like the Simpsons house, but there is one little thing about it that is special. And what that is to this day, there's a piece of concrete in the front of the house. And if you scroll a little further, Botter, you'll see it. That is still there to this day. That little concrete slab with Homer drawn in it. I think you just scrolled. There you go. That is still there to this day. So if you go find the house in Nevada, that little concrete slab is still on the walkway to the front door. Matt drew that in the slab the day that they officially unveiled the house or whatever. So there's just something really interesting about, and this is also a time where the show didn't have tons of merchandise. So it is sort of relevant to what the merchandise would become for the show, because people believe that this was like an attempt to sort of drum up interest in the show again and get people really engaged and, keep people engaged in the show. That's something that every big property has to do. So in that way, it is very relevant to the merchandise to me.
Man, talk about a PR stint.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
No, this is epic.
And not to Monday morning quarterback on the whole team, but I've said this a million times. Why didn't you just do a contest to where the winner would get the house built for them instead of building the house first? I'll never understand. Because the whole thing is, the person didn't want to have to move to own the house that won the contest. So they could have solved all that
by building it
after the fact. But hey, you know what? What do I know? I'm just a Simpsons historian.
No. You're a published author that knows a lot. And I think with that said, Warren, if the goal was to give people a preview of the book, I think we've exceeded that.
I think so.
Once again, the book is available by the time this episode comes out. If you're a Patreon subscriber, you got a couple of days before it comes out, but it is available on pre-order on anywhere you get your book, you get your
Amazon,
books.
Target, Walmart, Barnes & Noble. You can order it directly from the publisher if you want. You got lots of options. You can find lots of options either in the description of this episode or in my bio on Bart of Darkness. So go to my link tree.
Now, before we move on to our next segment, we should probably and finally announce the contest rules and explain how one lucky listener is going to be able to win a copy of Collecting Simpsons for free, right? So the book that we spent the last hour talking about and praising, one of you lucky listeners will be able to win the book for free, all right? I'll even get Warren to sign the book for you.
Yeah.
And since the premise of the book is all about Simpsons merchandise, the history of the Simpsons and spotlighting all the different merchandise that they put out, let's keep this contest related and very straightforward and easy. All you have to do as a listener is email me at theshortboxjacks@gmail.com, or you can shoot me a DM via Instagram or Twitter at theshortboxjacks and tell me what is your favorite piece of Simpsons merch. I want to know if you have a particular piece of Simpsons merch that means a lot to you. Maybe it's one you got as a kid, or maybe it's one that you recently got into or purchased. But I want to know, what is your favorite piece of Simpsons merch? All right, give me the item, give me a little anecdote. Tell us a story. All right, tell us what is the most meaningful piece of Simpsons merch to you. What's your favorite? What's the best one in your opinion? I want to hear about it.
I like it.
And I'm gonna let Warren decide on the winner since he's a professional.
Yeah, I like it.
So once again, tell me what's your favorite piece of Simpsons merch. You could write a short email and send that to theshortboxjacks@gmail.com, or you can DM your submission via Instagram and Twitter at theshortboxjacks. Let's go ahead and say you've got until December 16th. That's a Sunday. That's about 10 days from the time this episode drops. So you got 10 days to enter in the contest, to write in and send your submission. We'll pick one winner, and we'll get that shipped out to you. With that said, let's turn the corner and get into our last segment of the show, a fan favorite, one that folks have been asking to bring back, and I'm happy to oblige this episode. Let's get into our Fistful of Comics segment.
You can either have a mouthful of teeth or a fistful of comics.
Fistful of Comics is a segment dedicated to helping all you comic-curious newbies and loyal Wednesday warriors take your comic shopping experience to the next level by helping you find the best new comics and starting points that you just can't afford to miss. Now, how do we achieve this goal? How do we get listeners on board with the best new comic books coming out? by seeking out advice from our good friend Ben Kingsbury, the owner of Gotham City Limit, the best comic shop in Florida. So it's no secret that Ben spends a lot of time thinking about comics, reading comic books, as well as previewing new and upcoming titles. So safe to say he knows a thing or two about comic books. He's compiled a list of his top 3 comic book recommendations that he feels every single comic book fan, reader, potential newbie would enjoy. So we're not going to waste any more time. Let's get some music going and let's just dive right into this list. Let's take a look at his first pick.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, Shortbox listener. However you're listening and wherever you're listening from, I'm Ben K, representing the best of Florida, Gotham City Limit, Jacksonville, Florida. And these are my 3 FOC final order cutoff picks of the week you should add to your pull list immediately. First up, DC Comics presents John Constantine Hellblazer, Dead in America, #1 of an 8-part series. The creative team behind the best reviewed DC comic of 2020 gets the reins to John Constantine again. John Constantine has cheated death once again. However, his heart isn't beating, his body is decaying, and he's on the run in America, wanted for murder. My guess is that it's all John's fault, but isn't it always? Don't miss the return of the Hellblazer, as this promises to be ambitious and unmissable.
Good first start right there. Once again, that was John Constantine, Hellblazer, Dead in America, issue 1. Issue 1 drops January 16th. If that sounds interesting to you, get that on your pull list ASAP. Let's take a look at his second pick, coming into you hot.
Next up, the hot new publisher of the year, Distillery, debuts writer and artist Mirka Andolfo's Blasfamous, #1 of a 3-part series. Mirka is an international superstar. Think Sweet Paprika, Mercy, and Unnatural, as she dives right into our modern pop culture. Pop stars. This horror comedy promises to answer the question, how many fans is your soul worth? No one mixes the sacred and profane quite like Mirka. Don't miss your chance at this first issue.
I know that Ben, for the most part, will read a lot of the solicitations, but there's something about the way he reads it. You know, you're like,
he really kills it.
How much is my soul worth?
Yeah, I mean, great question.
So once again, that was Blasphemous #1 coming out through Distillery. And this one actually comes out this year. It'll be December 20th. So if you want to get that issue, definitely get that on your pull list sooner than later. And last but not least, for number 3, this is definitely one that gets me excited. Let's hear from Ben.
And last but not least, the Energon universe continues to expand within Image Comics as they present Cobra Commander #1 of a 5-part series. The rise of Cobra begins here. As a comic fan, there hasn't been anything red-hot writer Joshua Williamson has written recently that I haven't loved, and I personally can't wait for this. Cobra Commander has some seriously sinister plans to use the mysterious alien substance he's found, Energon, to send shockwaves across the globe. If you aren't already reading Void Rivals and Transformers, get on it. Bonus note, if you don't follow Gotham City Limit on all social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or X, trust me when I tell you, you're going to want to as soon as you're done listening to this podcast. Why? Because at the end of December, we will be debuting a 30-second promotional video made by writer Joshua Williamson himself, exclusively for Gotham City Limit. And he asked if we would rather have a G.I. Joe or Cobra-themed message, and I instinctively answered, Cobra! Get this on your pull list now. Well, another week is come and gone, and I'm still Ben K, representing the best of Florida, Gotham City Limit, Jacksonville, Florida. Remember, with great power comes great responsibility, and always take it to the limit.
That's my motherfucking comic shop right there.
And a shameless plug.
Man, it's never shameless with Ben.
Come on.
You know, like, I swear he thinks of some of the coolest things, like a promo video from the writer himself. You know what I'm saying? Like, Ben is always thinking outside the box, and that's why I love Gotham City Limit.
Very, very cool.
Once again, that was Cobra Commander #1, part of the larger Energon universe, which has been fucking phenomenal. Cobra Commander #1 comes out January 17th, and if I had to make a pick out of these 3 options, it'll definitely be Cobra Commander. Warren, did anything pique your interest? If you were to go into the shop and pick out of one of these 3, which one would get your vote?
Honestly, man, like, you know, and you know how out of the loop I am with a lot of this stuff, but just visually, This John Constantine looks crazy.
Oh no, the covers look amazing.
Like the cover is unreal. So that really, like all of them do that really piques my interest, just because it sounds like really gritty in a way that I think speaks to me. I like that.
That's solid, man. That is a solid. I don't think you can go wrong with any of these. I'm going Cobra Commander because the Energon Universe series has been great. Transformers has been on fire. I'm looking forward to Duke. G.I. Joe, I think, is loosely tied in, but Cobra Commander will be a nice lineup. And the fact that, Josh Williamson is going to be on a video shouting out Gotham City Limit, I got to go with the alumni.
Yeah, that's dope.
So once again, those picks are John Constantine, Hellblazer, Dead in America, #1, Blasphemous, #1, and Cobra Commander, #1. I'll have links to all three of these in the show notes. If you want to take a look at the previews, do so. And don't forget to put these on your pull list. Tell your comic shop to order them before that final order cutoff date. As always, a big shout outs to Gotham City Limit. Big shout outs to Ben for doing these lists. Always looking forward to what he finds interesting. It's always curious, like a guy that spends, I know he's spending, 12, 18 hours a day in a shop, how he still manages to get excited about comics and new books. So we cherish that. With that being said, that is the last segment for the show. Warren, you've been fucking fantastic as a guest.
You.
Another solid notch in your belt buckle of short box appearances.
I got nothing wrong with that. And I will say, to sort of piggyback off, what we're saying about the limit. If you have a comic shop in your area and you really like that shop and you don't know if they know about the book, chances are they can get the book. So if you're someone that, you don't want to support Amazon or whatever, or you don't want to buy it online, go to your local comic shop and I'm willing to bet they can stock my book. And so put them on, let them know to order it. So that's like, a nice little reminder. Your comic shop can help you get your hands on one of these.
Well said. And I know for all of our Jax peeps that shop at Gotham City Limit, I know Ben has ordered a couple. I think they'll probably be coming into the shop like maybe a week or two after the release date. So if you haven't already put that on your poll or asked Ben to set that aside for you, do so. And who knows, maybe Warren will come up there and sign a few copies.
Yeah, I'd be willing to do that.
We are going to wrap up this show. We went a lot longer than I thought, but all good stuff. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Warren, do you want to stay on and we can hop over to Patreon? Record a little longer.
Let's do it, baby.
Record a little bonus episode for the patrons and the diehard supporters. We'll do champion season. I got like 2 emails I'd like to catch up on. We'll just nerd out for a little longer.
Yeah, very cool. I guess I can do that.
What's interesting is that you're paying for that content yourself because you're a patron of the show.
There you go.
So if you're a listener and if you want to hear that conversation, or if you just want VIP treatment, if you want to be treated like VIP and you get extra perks and bonus episodes and early access to the podcast and all the other great things that our patrons get to enjoy, please consider heading over to patreon.com/theshortbox. Become a patron. We got tiers for all bank accounts, for all budgets. It's cheap. All right. I'm going to be honest with you. It's affordable and absolutely worth it. And it would mean a whole lot to us to have your support. Now, if you don't want to hop over to Patreon, all good, no hard feelings. We put out plenty of free content and you know where to find us. Now, I say that knowing that next week I'll probably be taking a break. I've got a lot of work ahead of myself for the upcoming Jax Podathon. If you live in Jax, if you're part of the Jax Podcasters United, you're probably familiar with that. So it's looking slim to none as far as new episodes next week, but I got some awesome things lined up for the rest of the month. So no worries, you'll still get plenty of content. You just got to give me a break next week, all right? Until then, I want you to take care of yourselves. Go read your comic books. Make sure you pre-order Collecting the Simpsons and continue to make mine and yours Short Box. I'll talk to you soon. Peace.